We ended the last lecture module with two heuristics, one about non-standard quantifiers and one about sentences that didn't explicitly include a quantifier. Here we want to caution against non-standard verbs, which really is pretty much all the verbs out there in English. Recall that our categorical logic is a pirate logic. That is, it only has the copula R and the copula R not. And as a result, all other verbs are non-standard verbs, the vast majority of verbs. So whenever we have a sentence, it's a pretty good chance that we're going to have to deal with a non-standard verb. And the way that we do that is either folded into the predicate class description, or folded into the subject class description, or folded into both. For instance, suppose we have a sentence, all people love the Macarena, a perfectly good English sentence, but it is not a perfectly good standard form categorical statement. And so as a result, we want to translate that in a way that gets rid of that non-standard verb and introduces our standard form copula. We can do that by saying all people are people who love the Macarena, folding loves into the description of our predicate class and including a noun phrase so that our predicate class includes a class of things. Similarly, if we have a sentence like Wallace moves like a cat, stop laughing now, we can translate that by taking moves and putting it into both the subject and the predicate class descriptions, and we can get something like all Wallace's movements are movements that resemble those of a drunken brain-damaged cat, which is probably more accurate, though if we wanted to play it safe, we would just say all Wallace's movements are cat-like movements. Some statements can be translated into our categorical logic, even though they're strictly speaking not categorical statements. And an example of this is a conditional statement. Conditional statements relate two statements together in terms of their truth value. They're not about classes of things. However, if we take our antecedent of our conditional as our subject class description and the consequent of our conditional as our predicate class description, we can push conditionals into our categorical logic without doing too much violence to their logical structure. So for instance, if we have a sentence like, if you work hard, you'll get ahead, there's a pretty straightforward interpretation of that in our categorical logic. A more strained example would be, if pigs fly, Bill will pass this course. So what do? Well, we identify our antecedent clause, usually by putting our condition into standard form. Antecedent clause first, consequent antecedent first, consequent second. We get rid of as many negations and other difficulties as we possibly can. And then our general rule is we use an affirmative universal quantifier, all, and then we use a description of the antecedent in terms of a class of things, all hardworking people, our copula, and then a description of the consequent in terms of a class of things, people who will get ahead. We can do the same thing with our pigs fly statement. It just is a little more strained. All flying pigs are indicators that Bill will pass this course. This captures in our categorical logic the basic idea behind this statement. If we have a phrase like the only, such as the only good homework assignment is a finished homework assignment, then we can get rid of the only, keep our order of our subject and predicate classes the same, and introduce our universal affirmative quantifier. And then we get all good homework assignments are finished homework assignments. Exclusive propositions are propositions where we're picking out a class by excluding other classes from the class that we're focusing on. So statements like none except Wallace is having fun, that would be an exclusive proposition. Similarly, none but the brave enjoy logic. That is also an exclusive proposition. To translate these, what we want to do is we want to switch the order of the subject and predicate as they appear in the original sentence, get rid of our exclusive phrase, and substitute in our universal affirmative quantifier. So none except Wallace is having fun gets translated as all people having fun, that second class, are people identical to Wallace. our first class. Our second sentence there, none but the brave enjoy logic, can get translated into all people who enjoy logic are brave people. Acceptive propositions are a little bit different. Acceptive propositions, they basically state a rule and an exception. So they usually include phraseology like all but, all except, or few. For instance, few believe in Clinton's fidelity. It suggests that there are people who do and that there are people who don't. And it indicates a relative size. All cats except Bill will sit on your face when you're asleep. That also indicates a rule and an exception to the rule. So when we translate an accepted proposition, we have one categorical statement for the rule and one categorical statement for the exception. So with few believe in Clinton's fidelity, some people are people who believe in Clinton's fidelity. There's our rule. Some people are not people who believe in Clinton's fidelity. There will be our exception. All cats except Bill will sit on your face when you're asleep. All cats not identical to Bill are cats that will sit on your face when you're asleep. Our rule. Our exception, no cats identical to Bill are cats that will sit on your face when you're asleep. Let's end this module by going through a few examples and trying to reinforce those translation heuristics through practice. Now again, I encourage you to look at the original sentence, stop the video, try to translate it, then start the video and compare what you did to what I did. Our first sentence is, terrorist attacks succeed whenever security measures are lax. When I looked at this sentence, I noticed that whenever immediately, and that told me that we're talking about times, and so I'm going to use something to express my categorical statement in terms of classes that are temporal classes. All times terrorist attacks succeed are times when security measures are lax. Let's try another. Every jazz fan admires Duke Ellington. Here, every is a non-standard quantifier, and I've got a non-standard verb. So I want to fold that verb into one of my subject or predicate class descriptions, introduce a standard form quantifier and a standard form copula. All jazz fans are Duke Ellington admirers. Let's try another. The electroscope is a device for detecting static electricity. Here we need a quantifier. We have to have R for our standard form copula. All electroscopes are devices for detecting electricity. How about this? All but the rats left the sinking ship. Here we've got an acceptive proposition. We're going to need to translate it using two sentences, one for the rule and one for the exception. All non-rats are creatures that left the sinking ship. No rats are creatures that left the sinking ship. Roses are red. Here we're going to need a quantifier, and our predicate class has to pick out a class of things. Some roses are red flowers. I chose some because all roses aren't red. There are yellow roses and white roses and so on. So it has to be some, and we have to add a noun phrase to get our predicate class that picks out a class of things. The narcissist cares only about themselves. This one's a little tricky, I think, but I think what we can do, since we have cares only about themselves, we have an exclusive proposition. All people about whom a narcissist cares are people identical to that narcissist. How about this one? A conditional statement. If you social distance, then you are less likely to catch COVID-19. Here we have a conditional statement. We want to identify the antecedent, you social distance, and the consequent, you are less likely to catch COVID-19. Our antecedent becomes our subject class. Our consequent becomes our predicate class. We use the universal affirmative. All people who social distance are people who are less likely to catch COVID-19. And with that, we're done with this lecture. Remember that when you're learning the skill of using the effective decision procedure and the skill of translating, the more practice you can get with feedback, the better off you're going to be.